Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be sharing with you this morning, although I'm also very nervous, as always. That's why it's such a rare occurrence, Dave. And I'm slightly more nervous just to share different thoughts. But for those of you who don't know me, my name's Warren Hartley, and I'm one of the facilitators here at St Brides of the Open Table community, and I've been part of the Sunday morning community for 4 or 5 years now. And it is a privilege to come and share a reflection with you that I'm always slightly surprised to be asked. As Dave said earlier, today we start a series of reflections, new series of reflections in our Sunday gatherings. So each series that we do arises from suggestions of topics to explore from within the community. So people make lots of different suggestions and they all go into the pot and we come out. And this week, this month, we're looking at prayer. I've entitled this series Honest Prayer, which is based on the title of a book, which is quite old now and a little bit dated, but still very, very interesting, by somebody who's a little bit of a hero of mine, Bishop John Shelby Spong. A somewhat uncontroversial figure, but also has a lot of really interesting stuff to say. So during this series, we're going to take a look at what we might mean by the word prayer and explore different prayer practices, different perspectives on what we're doing when we pray. And today I'll be attempting to examine what is prayer. Next week we have Francis Bennett, who was a former Trappist monk, and he'll be speaking on prayer from the heart, type of contemplative prayer. The following week Ray Simpson will be joining us, who's one of the founders of the community of St Aidan and Hilda, and he'll be talking about houses of prayer. And then finally Dwayne Williams, who's a lecturer at Hope University, and a colleague of one of our community members, Stephen Shakespeare, and he'll be looking at mystical prayer. So it should be a really fascinating series and something for everybody. So why am I talking on this topic? Well, you see, our Vicar Guy has a rather incredible gift. He calls it delegation and empowerment. But at our last worship planning meeting, when we were looking at possible topics for Sundays, I made the fatal mistake of again saying we should do a series on prayer. And before I knew what had happened, I had the job of organising it. Having said that, I'm glad of the opportunity to chew over a topic and attempt to gather my thoughts and feelings and to share them in a coherent way. And so I've been thinking about this topic off and on probably for the past 2 months since I took on the role. And I've been jotting down thoughts and collecting resources. But before I go any further, I have a confession to make. And that is that I struggle with prayer. I don't know about anybody else. In fact, I feel slightly something of a fraud by perhaps pretending to know anything at all about prayer, much less standing up and preaching about it. Though I lead a worshipping community, I work for the church, and have the presumption to call myself a Christian, yet I struggle with prayer. What is it? How do I do it? What am I doing when I do it? And what difference does it make? And how much of it should I be doing? Am I just talking to the ceiling? Or simply pretending or hoping in the silence? The funny thing is, though, I don't seem to be the only one who struggles. If you just glance at the shelves in a Christian bookshop and the number of titles old and new is enough to convince you that no one has yet nailed this topic and perhaps never will. So what is prayer then? It's a word we use a lot in church and religious circles, but have we really stopped to think about what it means? What are we referring to when we use that word? A good place to start is always the Oxford English Dictionary. That's where I always start. And it defines prayer as a solemn request for help or an expression of thanks addressed to God or another deity. Or a religious service, especially a regular one, at which people gather in order to pray together. Or thirdly, an earnest hope or wish. Is that what we're doing when we pray? Is that definition sufficient? Is prayer just asking for something and then being grateful that we received it? Or is it worse, perhaps even worse, just an articulated hope or wish? Neither of these feel particularly adequate to me. If prayer is just a shopping list of things I want from God, then that doesn't feel like a very enriching exercise to me. And based on my thousands of prayers as a young person, not particularly effective either. I'm not a millionaire. I don't have a big house or a well-paid job. I didn't become straight despite years of begging. Nor did God heal my grandfather of dementia or my aunt of cancer. Now, some of these are quite trite examples, and very deliberately so. One in particular I'm rather glad wasn't answered, otherwise I wouldn't be very happily married to my husband these days. But I recall reading book after book in my youth, trying to understand why God didn't answer prayer. And yet also trying to say why we should still believe in him and still keep praying. So one of the most common forms of prayer I was taught in church as I grew up was to use the acronym ACTS. Does anyone remember that? Yeah. It's an acronym that stood for Adoration, Confession, Thanksgiving and Supplication. That was prayer. Talking to God with words of adoration of how great he is, confessing my sins, giving thanks for forgiveness, and then ask for what I needed. I was reassured that this form of prayer was based on Jesus' teaching in the Lord's Prayer. And thinking about if that was prayer, I used to tie myself in knots as to what to say. And then in trying to follow St. Paul's admonishment to pray always, I just about set myself up for a nice padded cell. So praying through this way felt a little to me like adoration. God, you are so amazing. Confession, God, I am so worthless. Thanksgiving, I am so grateful that you are amazing. Supplication, I need these things. It feels as if I'm telling God how lovely he is, then telling him how bloody unlovely I am, thanking God for loving me despite how unlovely I am, and then just when he's all buttered up, presenting with a shopping list of things I need help with. I don't know about you, but it doesn't feel right to me somehow. And if it is, I'm not sure I want a part of it, to be honest. It feels a little bit more like magic. If I say just the right words in just the right order and stand in just the right way in just the right place, then I'll get what I want. It's a very rather individualistic and not particularly transformative experience. It may have made more sense to our ancestors and to our contemporaries who live under the despotic rule of all-powerful leaders, to whom you have to grovel and beg for favours, or you could be disposed of easily when life is cheap and there's no check on power. So herein lies my dilemma. If by rejecting a definition of prayer as adoration, acts, and all the rest in intercession, am I being arrogant and denying the power of God? Am I being a privileged postmodern Westerner scoffing at the simplicity of so-called less enlightened people? Or indeed am I creating a stumbling block by saying this kind of thing to people who think differently, who have had a different experience? I hope not. I hope not. My grandparents were devout Christians whose simple yet very profound faith believed deeply in the power of prayer to change things. By thinking differently, am I mocking the faith of my grandparents? I don't know. I haven't settled these questions for myself. But what then is my faith, and what do I mean by prayer? What we mean by prayer and how we do it, I think, will be entirely governed by our image of God. If we believe in the bearded guy in the sky type of God, who is watching every move and writing it down in his naughty or nice book, then deciding whether to intervene or not, depending on how many people are praying for you, or whether you're going to get that job, or whether your sister's cancer is going to be cured, then it would make complete sense to pray in the way I previously described. However, I want to share some words. There was a short sermon done by John Shelby Spong a few years ago that's on the Living the Questions program. And I remember the first time I heard it, it hit me like a bolt out of the blue. And so in the inimitable words of John Shelby Spong, suppose we change our God definition. Suppose we take God out of the sky and strip him of the powers which we have put in his place. And suppose we begin to think of God as a presence at the very heart of life. So if God is a presence at the heart of our world, our individual and our corporate human life, that means he's present in every living creature. And this presence we describe with words like the source of love, source of life, and the ground of existence. Or perhaps as St. Paul expressed it, the God in whom we live and move and have our being. I think if we look at God in this way, this fundamentally changes what we might mean by prayer. To paraphrase Bishop Spong, if God is the source of love, then we pray by loving and loving wastefully. If God is the source of life, then we pray by living fully. And finally, if God is the ground of being, we pray by daring to be all that we can be and to liberate others to do the same. Now that excites me. That to me feels honest and real. And so really you can say that to live is to pray, and to pray is to live, and to live in the awareness and experience of all creation as made in the image of God. Perhaps that is what St. Paul had in mind when he said to pray always, that our very life is prayer, and that prayer is life. Marcus Borg said it well, the Christian life is not about pleasing God, the finger shaker and judge. It's not about believing now or being good now for the sake of heaven later. It's about entering a relationship in the present that begins to change everything now. Spirituality is about this process, the opening of the heart to the God who is already here. I just need to repeat that last line. The process of opening the heart to the God who is already here. Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th century Danish philosopher, also said, the function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays. But what does our biblical tradition say about this? It might be all well and good for me quoting modern scholars, but what do the scriptures say, whose stories have shaped and influenced our faith? Our second reading this morning is probably quite familiar to many. About likewise the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought. But the very Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. I'd like to suggest that prayer is primarily about seeking a relationship with this presence at the heart of life. Prayer is not necessarily talking to God, but the process by which we open ourselves to a relationship of knowing and being known, of loving and being loved. To say it another way, prayer is about being present with God, present with ourselves, and present with other people. So how then do we pray? Very broadly speaking, there have been two traditions of prayer that have developed over the 2,000 years of the Christian tradition. They've been given Greek names, as all these things must. And the two words are cataphatic and apophatic. But actually these fancy words point to something of a useful distinction. So cataphatic prayer has content. It uses words, images, symbols, ideas, the kinds of things that we've done in our liturgy this morning. Apophatic prayer has no content. It means emptying the minds of words and ideas and simply resting in the presence of God. Both are valid, and both traditions can draw us into the practice of the presence of God, which is what I'd like to suggest prayer is. The practice of the presence of God. And opens ourselves, both of these traditions open ourselves to a relationship with that God. I'm very drawn though to the concept of apophatic prayer, spending time in silence and simply being, or to be still and know that I am God, as the psalmist puts it. I think this is also the kind of prayer Jesus might have had in mind when in our reading this morning he suggests that we don't heap up words or heap up empty phrases, I think our translation said this morning, but go to a quiet place and pray in secret. But prayer can also be a shared activity, and indeed I think it should be. The gatherings like we do on a Sunday and throughout the week. But have you ever noticed in the Lord's Prayer it's our Father, give us our daily bread, forgive us. So it's not a purely individualistic activity. I'm a bit old-fashioned, I know, but I also quite like the traditional words of the Lord's Prayer, even with its these and thys. And why is that? Thee and thy are now the abandoned English equivalent of the French tu. Tu is the word for you in French, but it's the intimate word. You only use tu with family, close friends, people with whom you have an established relationship. Vous is the more formal. So thee is the English equivalent of the intimate you, and so we address God in the intimate, in the familial, not in the distant. So if prayer isn't just for individuals, it's also a corporate communal activity and is thus community transforming. We talk about prayer as personally transforming, but it also transforms community. Just as I become aware of who I am in relation to God and transformed, so do we become aware of who we are as a community and are therefore transformed and transforming. Part of that transformation is that we experience and meet God in the face of those around us. Each person we meet is a child of God, a spark of the divine. And so we see the face of God around us. Even if that spark is obscured by the masks we wear and the experiences of living in a world where pain and heartache disfigure us. This perhaps is one reason I struggle with the very individualistic style of prayers I often hear. They can be all about the I. Father, I just. God, I need. We need each other in prayer. Even if, perhaps more importantly, we need others to discern with us so that we're not just listening to our own fantasies. If you've ever experienced communal silence, it's very different to individual silence. Both are necessary, both help us. And communal worship is very different from solitary. Both are necessary. So if we define prayer as a relationship, an opening of ourselves to God, does this mean we should stop doing intercessory prayer and stop praying for people? No, I don't think so. Because sharing our concerns means we're being open to their needs and being open to relationship with them. Should we not pray for healing? Well, yes, I think we should. Healing, wholeness and holiness are all related words. But how do we heal? We heal through relationship, through community, from being enfolded in love. Another quote from Bishop John Shelby Spong: "It is love that enables us to see ourselves as we are, to face our fears, weaknesses and mistakes honestly and openly. Love gives us the courage to be what we are and also to become all that we can be." So keeping in mind what I've said above, how then do we actually pray? What's some practicalities? How do we open ourselves to that relationship with God, each other, and practice the presence of God? Now, there are hundreds of techniques, and it isn't a magical spell or a one-size-fits-all. We're each unique and we each relate in different ways. But I'd like to share with you one technique that I found useful, that I've been taught by the Jesuits, and it's called the 4 anchor points of prayer. And it's very, very simple. The first point is they call preparation, which is just find a place. Light a candle, make it comfortable. Just whatever works for you. And then begin to reflect on, what am I seeking? What is going on for me at the moment? And then enter into prayer. Become still. Become aware of your body, your breathing, the people around you, if it's communal. And becoming aware that you are in the presence of God, who is at the heart of life. Stay in silence, use a mantra, whatever works, words like peace or love, or whatever is most important in that moment for you. And then rest in the presence of God. Thirdly, take a gracious leaving. Perhaps say the Lord's Prayer at the end of it, if that works for you. And then just leave the place where you've been with a sense of gratitude for that time. And then finally reflect. What arose within you? What struck you? Did a song come into your head? Did a reading? Did a poem? Think about it, reflect on it, because there's probably some real wisdom in that for you. Finally, to close, I'd just like to read a short quote, again from this book, that has quite struck me. So, Bishop Song says, "There is in my mind a difference between prayer and saying prayers. First, I define prayer in a rather traditional way. It's a human attempt to make contact with God. But God for me is found in life, not beyond life. I do not mean to state that God is not beyond life, only that we do not find him there. This is a crucial difference. For after we find him, we know that no limit can be placed on his infinite being. Therefore, if prayer is our attempt to discover God, prayer must be an approach to life. The life of prayer is thus for me the responsibility to open myself in love to the transcendent in everyone I meet. It is to meet life with all that I have and all that I am. It is to be ready to encounter people, to participate in events, to live in relationships. To live the life of prayer is thus to be vulnerable. It is to run the risk of being hurt in order to love. It is to live with courage and honest involvement with my world. It is to love life as my meeting place with the holy." So may our lives be prayer, and prayer be our lives.